Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Okay, today I have July's reading wrap up, I have some fun stats to go over, and I have a lot of great books to talk about, so I'm really excited about that. But also, I kind of dread filming this video. I know I've said that before, but just because I forget name details, so if you hear me say hero and heroine, just know my mind went blank in front of the camera, so I'm sorry about that. Anyway, I also wanted to show you my new adorable shirt by Hello Lovely Box. It's like a holographic rainbow type of decal, and it says audiobooks are real books, and I really, really love it. It's beautiful. I am a rep for Hello Lovely Box. My discount code is Crystal's Bookish Life 15, and the link to their shop is in the description if you ever want to pick something up. So, alright, let's go over the stats that I have for the month of July. So, I read 25 books, which is more. I think I read 24 in August. I have one book that I DNF'd, that's not included in the 25 books that I read. I actually DNF'd another book, but I'm not really going to be talking about it because I only read a few pages of it, and that was The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter. It was a thriller, it was a little too gory for me, and I was really just not liking the bad feeling that I had when I read it, so I DNF'd that. So, now, the breakdown in subgenre, I read 11 historical romance, I read 9 contemporary romance, I read 3 dark romance, and 2 fantasy romance. They're kind of... those two kind of defy subgenres. One, I'll get into it later, but one of those was Transcendence, which I don't really know how to categorize that, so I just stuck it in with my fantasy romance, and another one was Firelight, which is like a historical romance with fantasy romance elements too. So those ones kind of didn't fit anywhere, so I just put them in fantasy romance. So I read 18 audiobooks. That's how I get most of my reading done, is through audiobooks. I love audiobooks. They are so fun and enjoyable. I have a job where I can work at home and listen to audiobooks. I talk about it a lot, but I make animal sculptures. I own my own business, so audiobooks is a saving grace for me to get through the workday, and if I didn't have those, I would have only read 7 books, which is still really good. I read 7 physical books, either on my Kindle, on an ebook, or paperback, so I didn't break those ones down. Now into star ratings. I had 13 5-star books, 5 4-star books, and 7 3-star books. My 3-star book rating was actually kind of high, which surprised me a little bit because I feel like I usually have either I had a lot of 5 stars too. I have a lot of 5 stars, didn't have too many 4 stars, and then I had kind of a lot of 3 stars. No 2 or 1 stars, largely because I DNF'd the books that I probably would have rated that low anyway. So, alright, those are the stats. Now let's get into the books. Okay, the first book that I read was part of the historical romance readathon that was hosted by Jess, Lacey, and Lisa, and that book is Breathless by Beverly Jenkins. This is the second book in her Old West series. This is a historical romance in America. I absolutely adored the first book, Forbidden, so I had high hopes for this one. This one follows Portia, who is the niece of the heroine in Forbidden, and the hero's name is Kent, and he actually was friends with the Eddie and Ryan, who is the couple in Forbidden. This book was very soft and very beautiful and really a slow building romance. I just really, really enjoyed it. She really wants to be an independent woman and have her own job. I actually can't remember what she did for her job. This is what happens when I read these books at the first of the month and then I film my wrap up like a month and a half later, is I kind of tend to forget the details. But this book was lovely and beautiful, as is classic Beverly Jenkins, and I love the hero. He called her Duchess, that was his nickname for her, and it was just so sweet. This one was one of the more low angst books, I think. I think a lot of I feel like in general Beverly Jenkins handles the amount of trauma and sorrow that was happening in Black Americans' lives at this time in history with so much care, and I feel like she really handles that grief and struggle with ultimately making sure that they're happy and they get happily ever afters, and I love that about her book so much. And as far as that goes, like that balance of the grief and pain and trauma and happily ever after love and romance. I feel like this one was really low angst. It was just really sweet and lovely, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read was also one that I read for the historical romance readathon, and that was The Devil of Downtown by Joanna Shupe. This is the 3rd book in her Uptown Girls trilogy, and I really loved this. Actually, the hero Jack Mulligan is, he was one of my favorite heroes that Joanna Shupe has ever written. He is the kingpin of New York. He leads this crime. He is the man that nobody will mess with ever. Like, everyone is afraid of him. And the one thing that everyone knows about him is that he does not tolerate violence towards women at all. So when the green girl, Marjorie, is that right? No, that's not right. Justine, I don't know what I was thinking Marjorie for. When Justine hears about that, Justine is really interested, and she works in like charity work, especially with women and children who maybe like their husbands were kind of like deadbeats and they left them. So in this case, Justine is trying to get a woman's husband who abandoned her and all of her children to pay and support them. So she goes to Jack Mulligan to get his help, and that's how they end up working together, and that is how he gets to really be attracted and drawn to Justine, and she is as well. I really, truly loved their romance in this book. The build-up for their romance was so good. It was just fascinating to watch this powerful kingpin man just really bend for this woman who wants to do good works. However, the 3rd act conflict in here devastated me and broke my heart, and I felt like it kind of broke those beautiful feelings that I was having about their romance, and so I was honestly, it hurt me so much. I kind of wanted to give this a 3-star, but because their romance was so beautiful and this hero was just fantastic. Like, this hero is the kind of man that would go to war for anybody even like looking at his woman the wrong way. Like, he just is like way up here on the hero list, you know, like just loved him. And that's largely why I gave it 4 stars. So even though the 3rd act conflict was resolved, it wasn't resolved in a way that made me feel satisfied, and so it was a 4-star read. It was still really worth the read, but I do have to say this is one of the most disappointing books I've read by Joanna Shupe. Okay, the next book that I read is Bombshell by Sarah McLean. This is her new release. This comes out this month, August, I believe like the 24th. And this was an arc that I read. I actually didn't break down how many arcs I read. I did read quite a few. This was an arc that I read, and I really enjoyed this. I ended up giving this 5 stars. I will, however, say that this book, the beginning and middle of this book, was really pretty slow going for me. The pace of it was very slow, and a lot of that is because she was building up this new world with the Hell's Bells, which is basically a group of women who are kind of banded together to bring justice, basically, to other women and to bring down these men who are just vile specimens of men and who really go out of their way to take advantage of, abuse, and degrade women. So I really love that aspect of it. It has this book, like all of Sarah McLean's books, this book has a very strong feminist aspect of it, like very strong. That is key to the plot, that is key to her story, and it was really beautiful. I do feel like at times it may, if you're sensitive to that, like you don't really want that heavy-handed in your romances, it did sort of lean in that direction. But I do feel that Sarah McLean pulls it off really well, balanced with like just her beautiful romance. Like, the hero in this book, Caleb, pines for Cecily. These are characters that we've seen in previous books in Sarah McLean's world, and they were a couple that when I read, especially Day of the Duchess is where they feature most prominently, I was like, okay, I need their book and I need it today. So now we finally have Caleb and Cecily's book, and it was very much worth the wait. Their romance was beautiful. Like, the mutual pining of these two was a thing of beauty, and I really enjoyed that. The plot was also super interesting, honestly. I really like how she had a lot of fun historical details in here, things that you could tell she had clearly researched, and she did have a long author's note in the back saying this was what I found and this was true, so that was just fascinating, honestly. And overall, I felt like this was really a masterpiece in Sarah McLean's universe. I feel like this is probably her strongest work to date, and I really enjoyed it, so I gave it 5 stars. Really loved this one, and I'm excited for other people to read it so we can talk about it, because it was definitely worth the read for me, and it lived up to my expectations for sure. Okay, the next book that I read is Savage Lover. This is book 3 in the Brutal Birthright series by Sophie Lark. This is a mafia romance, and this one follows Nero and Camille. And this book I felt like this book had a really interesting beginning. It felt very new A or older YA, sort of had that coming of age vibe where they meet and they have a few flashbacks in high school, the couple meets, and she is a mechanic, her father is sick, and she loves working on cars, and she ends up running into some police. Her younger brother is really starting to get on the wrong side of the law, and the police stop them, and she sort of takes the blame for it. And so the police officer sort of uses her to break into the drug scheme that is going down at Nero's parties and things like that. And that's how Nero and Camille meet. So I really loved the dynamic between Nero and Camille. I felt like she was a very strong heroine. Like, she's one of my favorite Sophie Lark heroines that I've read so far. I really loved how fiercely loyal and protective she was of her family. And I liked how, even though she was kind of teased by, like, the mean girls at school, like, she never let that get her down. Like, she was still strong and confident, and I really loved that about her. And I loved how Nero was equally, like, fascinated with her, and fascinated with her interests as well. Like, they just kept kind of running into each other and had a lot of really great first meetings. I think that this book had a pretty tight plot throughout it, which I think took center stage and sort of left the romance on the back burner as almost like an afterthought. So this book was just really, really paled in comparison to how much I loved Stolen Air, which was book 2. So I gave this book a 3-star review. It was good it was a fast read. It gave me insight to characters who I know will play into future books in Sophie's books in the future. But by itself, it just really wasn't as strong, not anywhere near as strong as Stolen Air. And so the next book that I read is Bloody Heart. Yes, Bloody Heart by Sophie Lark. So this is book 4 in the Brutal Birthright series, and this book follows Dante and Simone. Now, this book was interesting, but I did ultimately give it 3 stars, and I think that the thing that I loved about this book the most is that Simone and Dante meet when they're very young. They have, like, a teenage love, and it was really beautiful. I loved their first meeting. I loved the forbidden element to it. I really enjoyed their beginnings to their romance. But then you have a time jump, and they don't meet until much later on. And at that point, I just sort of felt like once they had the time jump and they had separated, the plot of this one just really went off the rails. It was just kind of, I felt like she was trying to do everything all at once with this story and satisfy all of those needs. And to me, it felt like she was trying to figure out how to really write a cohesive romance mafia story and a great plot and character development, and so it just sort of felt a little disjointed to me, and it was ultimately unsatisfying, even though I really loved this hero because he is definitely an alpha and not extremely likable, and I was very much anticipating his book, but it did sort of just let me down a little bit in that it didn't really feel like I was satisfied on any level. Like, the romance wasn't satisfying after the time jump, and the plot was really, like, very disjointed. Things just didn't really make any sense. So I gave this one 3 stars and didn't really love it, but again, like, the hero was great, so. Okay, and the next book that I read is Blue-Eyed Devil by Lisa Kleypas. This is Lisa Kleypas' contemporary romance, and this is actually book 2 in her Travis Family series. I did read this out of order. I haven't read the first book yet, but it is on my TBR to get to for August. So this book follows our heroine, who is part of the Travis family, and she is wanting to be married to a man that her father does not approve of, and if she marries him, she's basically going to be, like, sort of disowned and cut off from the family. I have a hair in my face, I'm sorry. So one night at a wedding for her brother, she ends up in a wine cellar, and she sees a man who she believes is her fiance, and she sort of approaches him and just starts kissing him and touching him, and he is initially like, what is going on? And then he's like super into it and then just goes with it. And lo and behold, a little bit later, she realizes that it's actually not her fiancé, but the man that her family is sort of feuding with. Hardy Cates is a self-made man, and her family has not really gotten along with Hardy Cates very well. I know he features in book 1, And so she is initially a little bit disgusted at what just happened, but also like extremely intrigued because she had not felt that level of chemistry with the man that she's supposed to marry. And Hardy Kate, he feels the same way, just like super, super, super intrigued with her. So time passes, and Haven, the heroine, actually does end up marrying the man she was engaged to. It does end up being a very abusive marriage where it starts out pretty small, just with like some verbal abuse, some things that are hurtful, and then full-on domestic violence, like she's running for her life. So she ends up leaving him and coming back to her home family in Texas. And that is when Hardy Kate enters her life again. And it is their romance. And I adored this book. I gave this book 5 stars, but I feel like this is probably a 6-star read for me. I loved this book so much. It had such a great story. I loved Haven and watching her work through her struggles and really trying to overcome them. I do think that because this book focuses so much on Haven's story, it does kind of bridge the gap a little bit there between women's fiction and romance, but the romance elements in this were still so strong and swoony and just beautiful that I just absolutely loved this. I loved everything about it, honestly. So if you are interested at all in her contemporary romances, if you like Lisa Kleypas, or even maybe if you aren't a fan of what you've read of her so far, I would really recommend picking this up because it was fantastic. I loved every single page of it. 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is The Marriage Effect by Carla Sorensen. This is a contemporary romance, and this is a sports romance. I really loved this one. This was another 5-star read for me. This book was picked for me by Jessin from Jessin Reads Romance, and also Blue Eyed Devil was. A lot of the books that I read that were 5 stars that I'm going to be talking about right now were picked for me by Jessin. I asked her to put some books together for a TBR. I have some vlogs that I went into detail in my reading experience that if you're interested in that, you can watch those. But this book was a very fun, very low angst, very sweet, very happy read. I think this would be a great mood booster if you're just looking for something happy and fun. It's a modern day marriage of convenience between a football star who is basically the guardian of his sisters and this woman Paige who is in need of marrying so that she can have an inheritance. And they basically end up teaming up so that he can keep his being the guardian to his little sisters and she can get her inheritance, and they end up falling in love. It was beautiful, it was fun, it was sweet, it was just a really good time, and I definitely enjoyed it. So 5 stars for this one. Okay, the next book that I read is It Happened One Autumn by Lisa Kleypas. This is book 2 in her Wallflower series. I did a whole bunch of Lisa Kleypas reading to get ready for her new book, Devil in Disguise, and this book easily became a new favorite of mine by hers. I loved this book so much. I loved Lillian and Marcus. I think that they have a fantastic just like their love story was so great because they start out as enemies and then they have this big powerful attraction and then they end up just being so deeply in love that I just adored it. They were just fantastic, and Marcus is one of the best heroes that I have ever read. Like, he is really such an honorable man and he wants to do what's right, and he just completely falls for Lillian, who is an American girl, very like not conventional, doesn't really know all the standards, especially like she wouldn't be someone that you would think would be a good match for the Earl, who is Marcus, and just watching their attraction and relationship develop was just so beautiful and so fun. I just loved this book with my whole heart, and I gave this 5 stars, and this is one of my favorite Lisa Kleypas books for sure. Okay, the next book that I read is Torn by Carrie Ann Cole. This is also a contemporary romance, and this has some taboo elements. This is the love story between Kenzie and Torin. Kenzie is 17, basically, when this book begins, and it is the romance between her and the man who she refers to as Uncle Tor. They are not related by blood, but he has been around her from the time she was a little girl. He is her father's best friend, and there's a pretty big age gap there. I think it's at least like 15 years, something like that. I think that's how the age gap is, but nothing happens between them until she's 18. And honestly, I was very, very wary of this book because of that age gap. I was just like, I don't know how I'm gonna feel about that one. But I was also very intrigued, and when Jessen recommended this to me, I was excited to read it, and I can say without a doubt this is one of my favorite books I have read all year. I gave this book 5 stars, but this is definitely a 6-star read for me. I just fell in love with this couple. I loved watching them struggle with sort of the societal conventions of, you know, this taboo element in their relationship. Like, I really felt like I wasn't sure if I was going to believe it or not, but I completely did. I fell in love with them. I completely believed their love story. Torrin is just, he loves and adores her so much, and he wants nothing than just a life with her, but he struggles so much with if that's the right thing to do and what his best friend is going to think of them, and it was just fantastic and intriguing, and I just adored it. This is now one of my all-time favorite books, and I just loved it so much. Okay, and the next book that I read is Marriage for One by Ella Mays. So I had pretty high expectations for this book. I really, really thought I was going to love it. I know this is another modern day marriage of convenience, and I know this is kind of like a Grumpy and Sunshine trope. Like, he is definitely a grump and she is the sunshine. But I ultimately really didn't like this book, and I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. So the reason that they end up marrying is because she is trying to, like, open up this coffee shop, but she can't do it alone for financial reasons. I can't exactly remember why, but he... Oh yeah, so she was dumped by her fiancé just a few weeks before, and he sort of steps in and says, okay, well, let's get married. I will be the person you can marry so you can open your coffee shop. Like, I think there must be, like, an inheritance in there somewhere. I think that must be what it is. I can't remember. But anyway, modern day marriage of convenience. He sort of walks in. It makes sense on her end because she needs to be married in order to open this coffee shop, to have the money to open it. But he didn't really give her a good reason why he wanted to marry her, and he's honestly such a junk. I was gonna say grump and jerk. Such a jerk that I didn't really understand why he wanted to marry her. But the thing that really I just didn't love about this is it just, like, there was a lot of things that I didn't really like about this, but overall I just didn't believe it. I didn't believe their love story. It felt like the whole setup of why they were going to be married on his end seemed, like, very flimsy, and then when it's revealed the real reason why, it felt really... It just didn't feel good enough to me, and I didn't really feel like they had much chemistry. I just honestly didn't love this a lot. I was all set up to rant about this, and now, since so much time has passed, I'm like, I didn't hate it, but I also didn't love it at all. It's very, very long. I was bored through a lot of it. I just didn't love it, and there is a pretty big trigger warning in here for, like, a major medical scare on the heroine's part, like a major medical scare that was... And so she undergoes a lot of, like, medical testing, which I didn't know of, and that also probably contributed to how I didn't enjoy that, because as someone who has undergone a lot of medical testing and kind of had scary times in their life where you're not sure what's wrong with you and it could be something really bad, like, I just don't enjoy reading about that much. But I didn't love this book. I didn't feel like it delivered on the romance, and everything about it just sort of seemed, like, weak and underdeveloped. So 3 stars for this one. Okay, the next book that I read is Devil in Winter. This is book 3 in the Wallflower series. This book has the infamous Sebastian St. Vincent as the hero. We finally get to have his story along with Evie, and I will say that I just absolutely loved this. I felt like it completely lived up to the hype. This was a 5-star read for me. I loved watching St. Vincent, the ultimate rake and playboy, just completely melt for Evie. I loved Evie. She was a very, very strong, very quietly strong heroine, and I felt like I loved how she just went after her destiny to try and make the best situation in her life circumstances as possible, and I loved watching Sebastian just do whatever it took to make her happy and to just love her. I adored this book. I do think it lives up to the hype, but I will say that I don't think that you get that fulfillment of his character development if you don't read the series, and especially book number 2. Like, I think that you definitely need to read It Happened One Autumn, and is that the title? I forgot. Yeah, it happened one autumn, and then Devil in Winter, and then if you haven't read any Lisa Kleypas, I recommend those two, and then Devil in Disguise, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So I loved this one, 5 stars. Okay, and the next book that I read was actually an ARC that I received, and it was Twisted Games by Anna Huang. This is book 2 in her Twisted series. This is a contemporary romance, and this is a really fun setup because we have our heroine, who is a princess of basically a made-up country, and her bodyguard, and it is their romance. I loved this book so much. I was so excited to get this book in my hands. I was anticipating this so hard, and for me, it completely lived up to the hype. I felt like it was very fun, very entertaining. It was a little bit of a slow burn romance, but once they finally got together, it had a great payoff. But the thing that really stole the show for me was the hero. He was so alpha, like such an alpha, complete alpha, very dominant personality. But man, was he obsessed with her, and obsessed with her in a good way. Like, he just wanted her so badly, and I just loved it. I loved every single interaction they had. I thought it was fantastic. It was just such a good time, and I loved it. So this is a 6-star read for me. It's one of my favorite books I've read this year. Okay, and the next book that I read is Bittersweet by Serena Bowen. This is a contemporary romance, and this was a very fun book too. This one was pretty low angst and just like a really peaceful, enjoyable, fun read. This one is our hero Griffin and our heroine, who I can't remember her name, and they actually had a hookup in college where they had kind of like a one-night stand, a very passionate affair, and she is currently working for a restaurant where she's going out to try and find really great organic ingredients for the restaurant and bring them back, and Griffin is actually running that farm where he has organic produce, and he makes his own hard cider. So that's how they end up meeting, and they end up meeting where she sort of runs her car off the road, and he is the one who comes and rescues her, and when he introduces himself, she's like, oh yeah, I remember who you are. You were that guy in college. And so their relationship was really fun. They had that sort of tension of, we know what it's been like to be together, we have a lot of great chemistry, and we still want to be together, but also, how do they do that in the present day? So that tension between them was so fun, and I felt like this book had a lot of great comedy in here too, some really sweet and fun moments. It had set up for great characters that are going to be featured in future books, and I also loved the family of Griffin. Like, I loved his family, I loved his mom, I loved how he wanted to save the farm. It was just a beautiful read, and I gave this one 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is Transcendence by Shay Savage. This is the last book that Jesson from Jesson Reads Romance picked for me, and this was the book that I was very hesitant to read. I was really not sure I was going to love this. I had heard so much buzz about this, but I just wasn't completely sold on a caveman romance that is entirely from the hero's point of view, also when they have a pretty big language barrier. So I was skeptical, but this ended up being one of my favorite books that I've read in a very long time. It was a 5-star read. It was so beautiful. I just adored it. And the end of this book is what made it a 5-star read for me, because up until then I was like, yeah, this is a 4-star read, this is very solid, but the ending had me sobbing. It was beautiful. It was perfection. I just loved it so much. I thought it was super interesting about, the thing that I really liked about this one specifically was just watching their beautiful romance develop and really thinking about what it would be like to have that type of a life where where all of your time is spent with the person you love and you're working together to survive. Like, you're not worrying about jobs, you're not worrying about like you're worrying about kids, but not like taking the kids to sports. You're just working on living and existing and surviving, but also having the joy of doing that side by side with your partner. Like, I just thought it was beautiful. So 5 stars. I do think this book was worth the hype. I really truly loved it, and I did not think I would. So if you also feel like that, I would recommend you pick this up. Okay, and the next book that I read is Devil in Disguise by Lisa Kleypas. I read this book, I got this early, I found it on the shelves at Barnes & Noble, and I read it in a day. I have been dying for this book. This was one of my most anticipated reads this year, and it lived up to the hype for me. I completely loved this book. It was 6 out of 5 stars. I felt like this was one of the most romantic books I have ever read. It had such great characters. I loved seeing St. Vincent back in here, Marcus and Lillian. It was just beautiful, heartwarming. It just, honestly, I just loved it. I loved it. I loved it. It's probably my new favorite historical. Maybe Dreaming of You is still way, way up there. It's maybe tied with Dreaming of You. And the hero in here, Care McCrae, is tied for favorite hero with Derek Craven. It was just so great. Merritt is the heroine, and she is actually Marcus and Lillian's daughter, and she is running her husband's shipping company, and her husband has actually passed away, so she's trying to manage the business. She's a very successful businesswoman. She's super savvy. She really knows what she's doing. She's also very much like a genteel woman, like she has a lot of grace and class, and that's something that Keir, the hero, who is a Scottish man, who comes to talk to Merritt because they had some issues with some whiskey that he had shipped over there. And that's how they meet. There ends up being a pretty extensive plot in the background that was very fun and very fast-paced, but it was truly just their love story, and the highlight of this book for me was absolutely watching this brusque, harsh, sort of alpha, sort of rough around the edges Scottish man just absolutely love, worship, and adore Merritt, and see her as something so precious and something to just take care of and cherish. And like the thing that I just loved so much is that how he saw her as this just like paragon of beauty and virtue, and he just never felt worthy enough for her. Oh my gosh, it was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. I loved it. This is one of my top 3 books of the year. I'm not even kidding. 6 stars. Loved it. We also will be having a Rake Appreciation Society live show about this book next week, next Thursday on my channel. Okay, the next book that I read was an ARC, and it was The Duke Goes Down by Sophie Jordan. This book features our hero who is the Duke, or he's going to be the Duke, and then it is revealed that his parentage is actually a little dubious. His parents had him before they were married, so technically his Duke title is stripped from him, and he has lost all of his privileges, he's lost his title, he's lost his home, his income, everything. He's basically been ruined. And so he's trying to go about the town and find basically a rich woman to marry so that he can have the lifestyle that he's used to having. Our heroine in this story is the pastor's daughter in the town, and the pastor is aging, and she is actually writing his sermons for him, and the heroine and the hero in this book had a very antagonistic relationship. They met as children, and there was a lot of teasing involved, and it was just basically they butt heads all the time, didn't get along, and that animosity has carried over into their adult lives, and that's really the driving force of what's happening with the Duke's, or the former Duke's life, and everything that happens is a result of the heroine, basically, sort of being petty and taking vengeance. And I really didn't like this book, honestly, at all. I gave it a 2.5-star rating, but rounded up to 3 on Goodreads. I felt like the heroine was honestly just insufferable. She really made a big deal and ruined this man's life out of some petty childhood trauma that she had experienced. And I'm not saying that childhood trauma doesn't exist, but like her reaction was way over the line, and I just didn't believe their love story at all, and I just didn't like her, and it was not an enjoyable read, so 2.5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read was When a Duke Loves a Governess by Olivia Drake. This was also an ARC, and I don't have as much to say about this one, and that's largely just because I just wasn't super engaged in this. I didn't really feel like the story was very interesting at all. It had a pretty interesting premise in that the heroine wants to be a seamstress and open her own shop, but she doesn't have funds, so she decides to take a job as a governess, and she does with this man who has some rascally children, and it is their love story. There's also a background mystery plot. But I just felt like the opening was pretty good, the middle was extremely slow, and the payoff just wasn't worth it for me, and so I gave this one 3 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is book 4 in the Wallflower series, A Scandal in Spring by Elisa Kleypas. This book I gave 4 stars. This book follows Daisy, Lillian's sister, and our hero, Matthew. I couldn't remember their names. This is the one book where I can't remember their names, so this is probably the most forgettable book in the series for me, for sure. It's their romance, and it was beautiful. It was fine. There wasn't necessarily anything wrong with it, but it really pales in comparison, especially to Devil in Winter, and It Happened One Autumn. But again, it wasn't bad. It was a very beautiful, very interesting, fun romance, but it didn't hit me the same as the other two did. Okay, and then I read Tide by Carrie Ann Cole, which is book 2 in this series, the All Torn Up series. So this book features Torn's brother, Ty, who we see very briefly in Torn. Ty has had some pretty severe trauma that happened to him. His vocal cords are damaged, so he doesn't really speak, and when he does, it's with a really gravelly voice that most people find maybe frightening or off-putting. So he basically ends up living in a cabin in the woods, and he ends up finding this young girl, our heroine, Holly, in the woods. He ends up finding her when she is basically in a hole in the ground, and she's there with her dog. She ended up being kidnapped when she was 5 years old, and he finds her when I think she's 16, rescues her, and she ends up going back to her family, and then ever since he rescued her at 16, she refers to him as, like, her prince, her knight. Like, she is a lover of fairy tales. She had a book of fairy tales that kind of got her through that kidnapping time in her life. She was extremely abused, sexually assaulted, and she had a very, very difficult time when she was kidnapped. And so a lot of this book is her overcoming that trauma and trying to move on and live her life now. She ends up reconnecting with Tyler, and it's a beautiful, beautiful love story and romance of these two very damaged individuals who sort of find healing together and have a heartbreakingly beautiful romance. I loved this book so much, and I gave it 5 stars. Highly recommend it. Okay, my battery died. I talked too long, so I had to go get a new one. So let's keep going. Okay, the next book that I read is Firelight. This is the first book in her, I can't actually remember, I think this series is called like the Darkest London series. This is a historical fantasy romance, and I had heard really good things about this book, and so I was very excited to try it. And I really, really enjoyed this book. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. It has a really interesting fantasy concept in here, something that I actually have not ever read before. And we have a pretty big mystery surrounding the hero and what exactly type of fantasy or paranormal creature that he is, that when it was revealed, I was like, that's interesting. That's something I've never read about. So this couple had great heat. They had great chemistry. I really enjoyed their chemistry. I felt like they had a really great connection, and I just... my camera is having problems. And I just really, really liked it. I felt like they had a great first meeting in here, and it was a good time. It was a good time. There was definitely a part of this book that was a little bit slow. I felt like the middle was kind of trying to move the plot and the mystery forward and moving the romance forward at the same time, and it was like, wasn't a great pace. Some of it was kind of dragging, but I loved this couple. And the interesting thing about this series is that each book has a different couple. So this was a fun read. I enjoyed it, and I can't wait to read the next one. Okay, the next book that I read is With You Forever by Chloe Leese. This was an arc. This book comes out in September. This is book 4 in her Bergman Brothers series, and it features Rooney and Axel Bergman. I honestly loved this book. I was very surprised. I wasn't sure if I was going to. I had not read Chloe Leese before, so I was excited to try this. I gave this book 5 stars. Truly, truly enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic. Our heroine, Rooney, is in law school, but she is having some health issues. She has a chronic illness. She has IBD, ulcerative colitis, and she's been having some flare-ups that are kind of significant, and so her doctor told her, okay, you need to take a break from law school. You need to go and have some downtime somewhere. So she's friends with Willa, who is in a relationship with one of the Bergman brothers, and Willa offers her the Bergman family like vacation home that's up in the woods, basically. So she ends up going there to try and relax and, rest, and she ends up meeting Axel Bergman, who is up there. He has a cabin himself where he lives that is next to the vacation home. But he's in the vacation home because the home is having some extensive problems that need serious repair, like it's unlivable. So he's up there when she comes in, and he's like, well, you can't stay here because this is unlivable, so I guess you'll have to stay at my house. So they have that forced proximity there too, which is really fun. Now, the interesting thing is that in order to have the finances to make the home repairs, Axel needs a lot of money, and he doesn't want to let his family know what's happening, or he's worried that they may just sell the home, and he wants to keep it in the family because of all the great memories they've had there. So he is actually able to access a lot of funds, but only if he marries, according to a fortune, basically, that he was left by his uncle. So this is another modern day marriage of convenience. He approaches Rooney with this and she's like, sure, I'll help you with that. And it's their romance. It is so beautiful. It is so funny. It is so sweet. I just truly, thoroughly, 100% enjoyed this book. I felt like the handling of the chronic illness was very well done, and I loved Axel. He is also a neurodivergent hero, so that was a great representation there too. This was just a beautifully fun, super enjoyable read, and I highly recommend it. Now onto an arc that I did not enjoy very much, and that is The Duchess Hunt by Lorraine Heath. I was very much anticipating this book. I read the first book in this series, Scoundrel of My Heart, earlier this year and absolutely fell in love with it. It was one of my favorite books of the year. One of my favorite historicals for sure. I gave it 5 stars. But this book was really, honestly, kind of disappointing for me, and that makes me really sad because it follows the Duke of Kingston, who we meet in the first book, and it is the romance between him and his secretary, who is Poppy. I don't want to say a whole lot that will give the plot of this away, but basically revolves around Poppy is trying to find a new duchess for him to marry, and they have this great working relationship. They have a really strong bond, but the Duke just really did not realize that he had feelings for her until it was almost too late. And they both are harboring like these big secrets in their past, like huge secrets. And Poppy's is sort of like hinted at throughout the whole book that it's going to ruin her, it's going to really devastate her, it's going to be this big deal when everyone finds out. But the Duke's isn't really mentioned until just a few pages before his is revealed, and his secret seemed like quite a big deal, honestly, and it was really glossed over. Poppy's secret was also a pretty big deal, but there was much more emphasis focused on hers and how that was going to affect their relationship or her future, and I was pretty disappointed with how the Duke reacted once her secret was revealed. So I gave this 3 stars, and I am sad about it. It didn't live up to my expectations, sadly. Okay, the next book that I read was Cruel Enforcer by Maggie Cole. This is book 3 in her Mafia Wars series. This features Cora, who is a lawyer. She specifically focuses on like divorces for women. And our hero, who I think is Sergei? I can't remember his name. I don't think that's right. I can't remember his name, I'm sorry. But our hero is part of the Ivanov family, and he is honestly a pretty great hero. I really liked him. I felt like he was a very strong alpha. I felt like he had a really interesting Dom personality, and I really liked that a lot. I also really liked Cora. I felt like she was a very strong heroine. But this book kind of just didn't live up to how much I loved the other two. I felt like the plot was kind of all over the place. It was a little bit repetitive because we're going backtracking timelines because of how the books are set up. So we cover parts of what happened in 1 and 2. And I just didn't love this as much as the other two. It was still a good read, but it wasn't quite up there as the other two were, so 3 stars for this one. And now we have the book that I DNF'd, and that is Only When It's Us by Chloe Leese. So this is book 1 in the Bergman Brothers series. I did read this after I read the arc, and I had very high expectations for this after I read With You Forever. I was just positive I was going to love it because I loved With You Forever so much. However, this book has a deaf hero and our heroine who is an athlete. This book basically starts out where they're in college together and our heroine is really struggling in school, and the professor says, well, okay, you can work with this Bergman brother, I can't remember his name, I think it's Ryder. You can work with Ryder and he can help you pass the class. And she really doesn't want to work with him because she thinks that he's a bit of a jerk because he kind of like ignores her or doesn't give her the attention that she thinks she deserves. And she does not know that he is deaf. And so all of the behaviors that she's attributing to him and the bad behaviors that he is having with her are literally because he can't hear her, and she's just thinking that it's because he's a jerk. So that was a little bit like, I don't know, that seems like a pretty weak reason for them to be enemies to lovers, you know? But the thing that really did me in with this book is that Ryder eventually does get hearing aids, and when he has them in, he doesn't tell Willa about that, and he doesn't have to tell her about that, okay? I have a son who is hard of hearing, and he is not a candidate for hearing aids, but if he were able to have hearing aids and someone in his life was giving him a hard time for not disclosing that he had hearing aids, I would flipping lose my temper like crazy. So that's basically what happened here when Willa finds out that he had hearing aids and that he was able to hear her because he didn't tell her. And granted, at this point, like, they literally didn't even have a relationship. Like, they were just study buddies, kind of, and they weren't even really getting along, and she kind of flips out on him for not telling her that he had hearing aids and that he could actually hear some of the stuff she was saying that she didn't want him to hear. And I was just like, that bothered me so much, how she was just so on his case about things that had to do with him not being able to hear her or involving with his hearing loss, that I was just like, I don't like this heroine specifically because of her actions regarding his hearing loss. Not her actions, just that she's an unlikable character. It was specific to how she responded to his hearing loss that I'm like, I can't read this because I hate you. I hate you. I can't get behind you. I'm not interested in this book. So I do feel like the deaf representation was not handled very well here, and I was really disappointed, and I just DNF'd this book. So. Okay, the next book that I read was actually a novella, and it is Beauty and the Blacksmith. This is part of the Spindle Cove series by Tessa Dare. This is a very sweet, very low angst, very fun novella that I think would be really great if you needed something comforting or if you wanted something just fun to take you out of maybe a stressful time. I would definitely recommend this. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. It's the romance of one of the young girls in Spindle Cove who actually has asthma, and the hero who is the blacksmith of the town, and they have sort of been mutually pining for each other for a very long time. It was sweet, it was short, it was fun. I enjoyed it. 4 stars. Okay, the last book that I read is The Casanova by T.L. Swan. This book was up on NetGalley as an instant download for an ARC, and so I immediately got it when Jen told me that it was on there because I was very much anticipating this book, and I ended up really enjoying this. I gave it 5 stars. It was not on the same level as The Takeover for me, which is one of my top 3 books of the year. The Takeover is. That is a 6-star book, one of my all-time favorite books. I absolutely loved it. But I still really, really enjoyed this. This book follows Elliot Miles, who is one of the Miles brothers, and he is the CEO of Miles Media Company in London. So he lives there, he works there, and it is his story, and it's his romance with one of his employees. So his IT manager is Kate, and she is a little bit snarky. She's a very strong heroine. She really sort of butts heads with Elliot. They had this meeting initially that did not go well at all, and ever since then they have really had this antagonistic relationship where they both just sort of shoot barbs at each other all the time. They're verbally sparring all the time, and they definitely have the setup for an enemies to lovers relationship. Now, one day, Kate ends up coming into the office in a tight little red dress to play, like, I think it's called, like, net ball or something like that. It seemed reminiscent of, like, a tennis uniform in my head. And she shows up there to work one day in this dress, and Elliot ends up seeing her on one of the security cameras, and he doesn't realize that it's her, but he's insanely attracted to her and cannot stop thinking about her. And that's basically how their relationship begins. It's a fairly long journey to get them to their happily ever after. They have a lot of ups and downs along the way. There are beautiful cameos of Tristan and his family and the kids. And this book had some really great humorous moments. It had really great side characters. It had one of the most beautiful and epic groveling scenes at the end that without that, this book would have been a 3-star for me, quite honestly. But the ending, the grovel, everything that happened in the end made the entire book work for me. It was just beautiful. There were definitely some flaws with this book. I will say it's not without its flaws for sure. But for me, I was able to overlook those because of that beautiful, powerful grovel in the end. It just made everything work for me. So I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was a really, really fun read, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. So, all right, we did it. We talked about all 25 books plus 1 DNF, and yeah. Thanks so much for watching this video, my friends. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have made it this far, please feel free to leave me a blue heart, and I'll see y'all in my next video.